All right, so today let's take a deep dive into something I think we've all probably felt at one point or another in our long-term relationships. That feeling of, is the spark fading?
Yeah.
And we've got a super interesting article from the relationship app Paired called What to Do If You're Not Attracted to Your Partner Anymore.
And don't worry, everybody, this isn't about doom and gloom.
No.
We're going to unpack why this happens and, more importantly, what we can actually do about it.
You know, it's funny how we always talk about the spark, like it's this magical thing. But there's actually a lot of science behind attraction
Yeah.
and how it evolves over time.
Okay, so break it down for us. What's the science behind losing that initial, like, can't keep my hands off you feeling?
Well, think about those early days, the honeymoon phase. It's all driven by hormones like dopamine and norepinephrine. They create that intense rush of excitement and desire. But like Dr. Marissa T. Komen points out, that can't last forever. Our brains just aren't wired that way.
So those butterflies are destined to fly away eventually. That's kind of a bummer. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It's not that the relationship is doomed. It's just transitioning into what Dr. Cheryl Fraser, a Buddhist sex therapist, calls relationship incorporated.
Relationship incorporated. Okay, that sounds kind of formal. What does that actually mean?
Well, it's the phase where life's practicalities take center stage. Talking mortgages, dentist appointments, maybe even kids. All that adulting stuff. Doesn't exactly scream romance.
Okay, so the novelty wears off and we get stuck in a routine. But isn't routine good? I mean, it creates stability, right?
Stability is great, but our brains still crave novelty. That's just how we're wired. And if we're not intentional about injecting some excitement and fun into our relationships, boredom can set in.
So are we just supposed to accept that the spark is going to fade over time? Or is there something we can do to keep it alive?
Absolutely not. It's not about accepting the fade. It's about understanding why it happens and then taking proactive steps to reignite that connection.
Okay, let's talk about those steps. This Paired article mentions being intentional. What does that actually look like?
It means treating our partners and ourselves better, like Dr. Cohen suggests. It's about making the relationship a priority, not just letting it run on autopilot. Think of it like this. You wouldn't neglect a plant you love and expect it to thrive, right? Relationships need tending, too.
So what are some of the gardening tips for our love lives? What can we actually do?
The article has some great suggestions. It could be something small, like leaving love notes, surprising your partner with their favorite takeout, even bringing home flowers. Those classic romantic gestures still work.
Oh, those are sweet. But I can already hear some people saying those are cliches.
Yeah.
Do they really make a difference?
They do. Remember, it's about breaking routine and showing your partner you're thinking of them. And those little gestures can spark a chain reaction. Your partner feels appreciated, they do something nice for you, and suddenly you're both putting in more effort.
It's like a positive feedback loop of love. Okay, so gestures are good, but what about something a little more physical?
Physical touch is huge. There's a strong link between touch and relationship satisfaction. And I'm not just talking about sex, although that's important too. Think back rubs, holding hands, even just a quick kiss hello. These little touches make a big difference.
It's like speaking a love language that goes beyond words.
Exactly. And speaking of connecting on a deeper level, sometimes we need to rediscover each other. After years together, it's easy to fall into these surface level conversations.
Oh, I know that routine. How was work? Did you take out the trash? What's for dinner?
Right. But Dr. Fraser recommends shaking things up. She gives her couples lists of questions for date nights that go beyond the day-to-day. Think like, if we could take 3 dream vacations, where would we go? Or, what's one thing you've always wanted to try but been too shy to tell me?
Whoa, those are getting deep. I like it. It's like a fun way to uncover new layers of your partner, even after years together.
Exactly. And if you need inspiration, the Paired app has a whole library of these conversation starters.
That's awesome. So we've covered gestures, touch, and deep conversations. What else can we do to combat that relationship boredom we talked about?
Remember how our brains crave novelty? Trying new activities together is a fantastic way to inject some excitement and create shared experiences.
So we're talking like taking a pottery class together, going rock climbing, exploring a new part of town, anything that breaks you out of that predictable routine.
Exactly. And research shows that these shared experiences, especially if they involve a bit of challenge or even adrenaline, can actually boost passion and attraction.
It's like creating new memories together, reminding yourselves why you clicked in the first place. Okay, this is all great. But let's be real for a second. What about sex? How does that fit into all of this rekindling the spark stuff?
Sex is a vital part of many relationships, but it's often where those feelings of fading attraction show up most intensely.
Okay, so we're talking about sex, a topic that can be a bit, well, awkward to discuss. But when we're talking about reigniting the spark, it's kind of important, right?
It's definitely a key part of the equation for many couples. And this is where understanding the science of desire can be really helpful. You see, there are two types of desire: spontaneous and responsive.
Spontaneous desire that's like that out of the blue, I can't keep my hands off you feeling.
Exactly. And in the beginning of a relationship, it's often fueled by those hormones we talked about earlier, dopamine, norepinephrine. But over time, as the relationship matures, that spontaneous desire tends to fade.
Which makes sense. I mean, if we were walking around with that level of lust all the time, we'd never get anything done.
Exactly. But here's the good news. There's another type of desire called responsive desire.
Responsive desire. What's that?
Responsive desire is basically desire that arises in response to, well, something. It could be physical touch, it could be an intimate conversation, it could even be just feeling relaxed and connected with your partner.
So it's not about waiting for that spontaneous urge to strike. It's about creating the conditions for desire to emerge.
Precisely. And one of the most effective ways to do that is through something that might seem a bit counterintuitive: scheduling sex.
Wait, scheduling sex, doesn't that sound kind of unromantic?
I know it might sound that way, but hear me out. Dr. Fraser, the sex therapist we mentioned earlier, is a big proponent of this. She explains that when we wait for spontaneous desire to strike, we might be waiting a long time, and in the meantime, we're missing out on opportunities to connect physically and emotionally.
So by scheduling sex, you're essentially creating a space for intimacy and giving yourself permission to let those responsive desires kick in.
Exactly. And research actually shows that many couples find that once they get started, that initial reluctance melts away, and they end up having a really fulfilling experience.
I'm starting to see how this could work. It takes the pressure off waiting for that magical mood to strike,
Very good.
allows you to be more intentional about intimacy. But let's go back to something you mentioned earlier, the idea of attraction being an inside job. I'm really intrigued by that concept.
It's such a powerful idea, and it really gets to the heart of creating lasting change in our relationships. It's about recognizing that we have more control over our feelings of attraction than we might think.
So instead of trying to change our partner, we need to focus on shifting our own mindset.
Exactly. Remember, our feelings of attraction are often influenced by things outside of our partner: stress, fatigue, even societal pressures. We're bombarded with images of ideal beauty and romanticized relationships, and it's easy to start comparing our partner to those unrealistic standards.
It's like we're constantly being sold a fantasy version of love, which makes it hard to appreciate the real, messy, perfectly imperfect beauty of our own relationships.
You nailed it. So, part of this inside job is about becoming aware of those external influences and consciously choosing to focus on what we genuinely appreciate about our partner.
It's about shifting our perspective, right? Instead of dwelling on what we might be missing, we can choose to appreciate the qualities that make our partner unique and special.
Exactly. And that's where gratitude comes in. The more we focus on what we're grateful for in our partner and our relationship, the more those positive feelings will grow. It's like shining a light on all the good stuff instead of getting fixated on the perceived flaws.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we need to cultivate gratitude. But we talked about sharing one thing we appreciate about our partner each night. What else can we do?
Mindfulness is a powerful tool for cultivating gratitude. It's about taking a few moments each day to pause and really appreciate the good things in our lives, including our partner.
So it's not just about grand gestures or special occasions. It's about noticing those small moments of joy and connection throughout the day.
Exactly. And it could be something as simple as noticing how your partner makes you laugh or how much you enjoy their company while doing mundane tasks like grocery shopping. It's about training our brains to see the good, to savor those little moments that we might otherwise take for granted.
This is starting to feel like much more than just rekindling attraction. It's like we're actually cultivating a deeper sense of appreciation and connection in our relationships.
You're exactly right. It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we have, from what we want to change in our partner to what we can appreciate and celebrate.
Okay, I'm on board with the gratitude and mindfulness piece, but I feel like there's something else at play here too, something about our own self-perception.
You're so right. We can't talk about attraction without talking about self-love. It's the foundation of any healthy relationship.
Because if we don't love ourselves, how can we expect someone else to?
Exactly. And often those insecurities and self-doubts that we project onto our partners are really stemming from our own unresolved issues.
So part of rekindling the spark is about doing our own inner work, addressing those insecurities, and learning to embrace ourselves fully.
Absolutely. When we feel good about ourselves, when we're confident and secure in who we are, it naturally radiates outward and impacts how we view and interact with our partner. It's like our inner light shines brighter, illuminating the relationship with a renewed sense of love and appreciation.
I love that imagery. But I have to be honest, self-love can feel like a really big, sometimes daunting task.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
It's a journey, not a destination. And it starts with being kind to ourselves, practicing self-care, and celebrating our strengths and imperfections alike.
So concretely, what does that look like? Give me some examples.
It could be as simple as taking a break when you're feeling overwhelmed, setting healthy boundaries, or pursuing hobbies that bring you joy. It could also mean challenging those negative self-talk patterns and replacing them with affirmations and positive self-reflection.
It's about treating ourselves with the same love and compassion that we would offer a dear friend.
Beautifully said, and remember, self-love isn't selfish. It's essential for building healthy, fulfilling relationships.
Because when we love ourselves, we're better equipped to love and support our partner in a more authentic and meaningful way. We're bringing our whole selves to the table, not just our insecurities and doubts.
Exactly, and that's what creates a strong foundation for lasting love.
Okay, so we've talked about getting intentional, understanding the science of desire, and even this idea of attraction being an inside job. But there's one piece of the puzzle that we haven't fully explored yet, communication. It feels like every relationship expert talks about communication. But why is it so crucial when it comes to this specific challenge of rekindling that spark?
Yeah, you're right. Communication, IS, a bit of a buzzword, but think of it this way. We can cultivate all this self-love and gratitude, and we can understand all these nuances of desire. But if we're not communicating our needs and feelings to our partner, well, they're left guessing.
It's like trying to read someone's mind, which, spoiler alert, none of us can actually do.
Exactly. And that's where things can get messy. Assumptions get made, resentments build, and suddenly you're both feeling disconnected and frustrated. But clear communication is like a bridge between those internal shifts we've been talking about and actually creating positive change in the relationship.
So how do we get better at communicating, especially about something as sensitive as feeling a dip in attraction?
Well, the paired article with advice from Dr. Fraser is very specific about this. She
Hmm.
cautions against just blurting out, "I'm not attracted to you anymore." I mean, just imagine hearing that from your partner. It would be pretty devastating, even if it's not meant that way.
Yeah, even if it feels true in this moment, there's so much more to the relationship than just that one feeling.
Yeah.
Dropping that bomb without the right context could really do more harm than good.
Exactly. But she doesn't say to avoid the topic altogether. If both partners have good communication skills, and if they're both self-aware and able to regulate their emotions well, then a deep, loving conversation can be really productive.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty high bar to clear for some couples. But isn't it also true that if those elements are in place, then you're probably in a relationship that can work through just about anything?
You've hit on a really important point. Those very qualities that allow for this kind of vulnerable conversation are also the building blocks of resilience and growth as a couple.
So if you were going to have this conversation about the dip in attraction, how do you do it well? What are the keys to making it productive instead of destructive?
First and foremost, frame it from a place of love. Emphasize that this is a normal challenge that a lot of couples in long-term relationships go through, and that you want to work on it together. It's not about blame, it's about reconnection.
So it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem.
Exactly. And be specific. Focus on behaviors, not character flaws. So instead of saying you've let yourself go, try saying, "I really miss the way we used to cuddle on the couch." It's a subtle but really important difference.
One is like attacking your partner's identity,
Yeah.
and the other is expressing like a longing for a specific type of connection.
Right. And be willing to listen. Really listen to your partner's perspective without getting defensive. Maybe they're feeling neglected too or stressed about something that you weren't even aware of.
It's amazing how many relationship problems stem from things that just go unsaid, from assumptions we make instead of actually seeking to understand.
Absolutely. But even if a direct conversation about the dip in attraction feels too risky right now, there are other ways to communicate your needs.
Okay, give us some actionable strategies.
Remember all those things we talked about earlier? Romantic gestures, physical touch, date nights, trying new activities together. Those are all forms of communication, too.
It's like you're speaking a love language through actions instead of words.
Exactly. By initiating those things, you're sending a clear message to your partner that you care about them. You want to connect with them. You value the relationship. And sometimes those actions can even be more powerful than words, especially if words feel difficult or risky right now.
And don't forget about positive reinforcement, Like when your partner does something that you appreciate, even something small, acknowledge it.
Absolutely. A simple thank you for doing the dishes that really helped me out tonight can go such a long way. These expressions of gratitude create a positive feedback loop, encouraging more of the behaviors that you want to see.
It's like instead of focusing on what's wrong, you're focusing on what's right. And that can shift the whole dynamic of the relationship.
You got it. And this ties back to what we discussed earlier about making love a hobby. It requires a commitment to ongoing learning and practice, just like any skill we want to master.
So communication isn't just a one-time fix,
Hmm.
you know? It's an ongoing process of tuning in to each other's needs, expressing ourselves authentically, and being willing to adapt and grow together.
Exactly. And that brings us to our final thought for today. We've talked about all these wonderful strategies for reigniting the spark in our relationships, but they're only as good as the foundation they're built upon.
What do you mean by foundation?
I mean, the core values that underpin the relationships: respect, trust, empathy, shared goals, and a genuine desire to see each other thrive.
Okay, so it's like
Yeah,
you could have the fanciest car in the world,
Yeah.
but if the engine is busted, it's not going anywhere.
exactly. So, dear listener, as we wrap up this deep dive into rekindling the spark in our relationships, we challenge you to reflect on the foundation of your own relationship. What are its strengths? What areas could use some reinforcement?
And remember, just like that inside job of personal growth that we talked about earlier, tending to the foundation of your relationship is an ongoing process. It requires effort, honesty, and a willingness to show up for each other, even when it's hard.
But when that foundation is strong, you have the resilience to weather any storm and the potential to create a love that truly lasts.
And on that note, we'll leave you to continue your own deep dive into the mysteries and magic of love. Until next time, fellow explorers,